I'm really excited to be with you guys, and I have a Cuban background, so I speak very quickly, naturally, and time is of an essence here, so I will speak a little faster than normal. That means you need to put on your seatbelts. We'll try to keep it at a safe speed. I work with Reasons for Hope, and we equip young people, parents, teachers, schools, parents, everybody on how to defend your faith. What are the tools you need to defend your faith? You may have seen our cool little bug outside, the debunked van. I'll talk to you a little bit about that later on. But I want to get talking to you today about the Titanic. That's where I want to start. And if you know the story of how many saw the movie Titanic? You realize that's 3 hours you're never going to get back, right? How many of you did not see it? Okay, that's great. I'm in that list, okay? I want to give you, do you want to see the man's version of, I made a short little man's version of the Titanic. You want to see it? No, you don't want to see it? All right. You do, right? Okay. So here's, make sure we got audio, okay? Because this is a man's version of the Titanic. And if you haven't seen the movie, this is all you need to know. Okay, here we go.
But the ship can't sink.
There you go. That's all you need to know. The ship can't sink. It's gone. All right. The reason I start with the Titanic is because I want you to understand something. This was a ship that was unsinkable. The engineers were so convinced this ship would never be sunk because of the way they designed it. The hull, the bottom of the ship, was divided in compartments. And because it was divided in compartments, they figured that even if one compartment was damaged or perforated by something, all the others would remain dry and the ship would not sink. So it was an incredible design. They were very excited about it. They had a press conference before the release, and a lot of this you can still see. You can find documentaries about this. They had a press release. They had a great press conference. They were asked some key questions that the answers were very interesting. One of the questions they were asked was, how come you have lifeboats on this vessel for 1,000 passengers, but the vessel can hold 2,500 passengers? You don't have enough lifeboats for the number of people that you're going to put on the boat. What was their response? Those lifeboats are not for the Titanic. Those are to help other ships that may sink, because the Titanic won't sink. That was their response. They set out on their maiden voyage to New York, and they were going to do it in record time. Every transatlantic trip or any kind of trip on a cruise liner requires by law a safety exercise or drill. And so if you've ever been on a cruise, you know that at a certain time you got to go up on deck, you got to go to whatever section you're supposed to go on, and you got to know what you do. This is the boat you get on here, the life jackets. So the Titanic was supposed to have one of those that afternoon, that ill-fated afternoon, and they canceled it. Why did they cancel it? Because why would we need one? The ship can't sink. And that it was just incredible hubris. They were just so convinced it wasn't going to happen. They were going faster than they were supposed to be. They got a warning from another ship that was coming on the contrary, that was coming from New York towards England. And that warning said to them, look, there's a lot of icebergs. You got to be really careful. You got to navigate slowly so you have time to maneuver. And their response was, we're not worried about it. We're not worried about it. They were full steam ahead. They were so convinced the ship couldn't sink that even after they hit an iceberg, which, by the way, the icebergs, they were going so fast, when they hit the iceberg, it cut across all the bottom of the hull, compartment after compartment after compartment. That's why the ship sank. Their design didn't take into account their hubris and their arrogance. And so even when the ship was taking water, it is recorded that the people would come out and say, what's going on? And the crew would say to them, go back to your cabins. Everything's going to be okay. This ship can't sink. That's how bad it was. Well, we know that it sank, and thousands, over 1,000 people lost their lives with the sinking of the Titanic. Now, why do I use this analogy, or why do I start with this? I'm not going to talk to you about the Titanic necessarily. What I want to talk to you about is something that's happening in our culture that's very similar to what happened in the Titanic. There's another ship that our culture says cannot sink, and that's Darwinism. It's a ship that is supposed to be unsinkable, and there's an enormous amount of hubris tied to that concept that the ship is unsinkable. And even though it's taking on a lot of water and it's in really bad shape because it's hit certain icebergs of truth that have been devastating to the ship, still people don't want to abandon the ship. Now, unlike the real Titanic, there is a group of people that have already abandoned ship. There are thousands of scientists today that have abandoned ship. Now, that doesn't mean they have become Christians. All it means is there's a lot of scientists that are saying, you know what? It doesn't explain a lot of what we need to know. And as a matter of fact, it creates more questions than it answers. We need to find an alternative to Darwinian evolution, because that whole picture of molecules to man it doesn't work. It doesn't answer the questions, and we're having difficulty with it. So this talk is called Titanic 2, Darwin's ship is sinking. Now, I want to make two important clarifications to begin with. First of all, when we talk about evolution, it's a very general term, okay? And so we have to be careful. There's two types of evolution. One of them is called microevolution. And by the way, we did not invent these categories. Darwin himself, when he wrote The Origin of the Species, he distinguished between specific or special evolution and general evolution. So this is his idea. We just changed the names to make it a little more obvious what the meaning is. Microevolution is evolution that takes place within a kind, and we see tons of it. There's a lot of examples of it. The Galapagos finch beaks, the new strains of flu viruses, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, variations in stickleback armor, etc., etc. There's a lot of evidence in our scientific world that evolution does happen. It happens at a micro level within a kind. And by the way, we don't have any problem with that. We don't have any problem because all the information that's required for that variation is already in the DNA. So what does that tell us as Christians is that is a design feature that God built into living organisms. Think about it for a minute. If God had created animals so static that a temperature change would be the end of the animal kingdom, that would not be a good design. If he would have created or designed human beings without the ability to adapt to changes in our environment, changes in our diets, etc., it would not be a good design. God, as a matter of fact, showed that he is the engineer of all engineers. He designed us just like an engineer would design a submarine to be able to work on shallow waters and deep waters, warm waters, cold waters. What he did is he built us with sensors. Our skin has sensors, enormous sensors, that are very fine-tuned to catch changes that are critical to our health and our well-being. When our sensors pick up these changes, automatically, just like we do in a submarine, just like an engineer designs it to do, the sensors send a message to the central processing unit. And that central processing unit sends out messages to the body and launches mechanisms, we call metabolisms, that allow us to adapt. So our temperature is regulated, our diet is regulated, and I'll give you an example. If you go without eating for a day, on your second day of not eating, those sensors have told your central processing unit that there's an issue, there's a problem. So automatically, your body, your mind launches mechanisms in your body that slow down your metabolism so you use less energy, and that stays like that for a time period. If during that time period you don't eat, then the body sends additional resources, additional mechanisms, more urgent mechanisms that start to take the fat that you have accumulated in your body and turn it into sugar so that you have energy. And that gives you more time before you die of not eating. It's an incredible mechanism. That's why some of us have extra reserves, just in case. I can go many more days without food than you can. Okay, now, but what does this show? It shows incredible design. And so we don't have a problem with evolution per se. We have a problem with certain definitions or thoughts of evolution. Microevolution is not an issue. Not at all. And here's a mistake we often make as Christians, and I want you to avoid this mistake. Give me the benefit of the doubt for a few minutes. I'm going to show you the evolution that we are against and the ship that is sinking. But it's not this one. Microevolution is not it. But don't make the mistake a lot of Christians do, and that's throwing away the baby with the bathwater. When you say evolution is a lie, that's a very vague generality that doesn't apply to microevolution. And so unsaved unbelievers hear you say something like that, and they realize how much of a moron we are when we say that. And therefore, we lose all credibility with them because there are libraries, entire libraries full of proof and evidence that we do adapt. Bacteria develop resistance against antibiotics. That is microevolution in front of our very eyes. So to deny that is to deny reality. And so we often make that mistake. We have to be more specific of what it is that we deny. And we categorically deny macroevolution, the other kind of evolution. And that's the evolution or the theory that everything we observe in the world we live in today comes from a common ancestor. Everything. Everything. That means that from a first cell that we have no clue of where it came from or how it came about, from that first cell, we can account, supposedly, by this theory, the origin of every single variety of plant and every single variety of animal life on this planet, all having a common ancestor. It's the idea that that first cell eventually became a fish that eventually crawled out of the water, that some of them grew feathers and others grew hair, some of them had feet, others had, just did not have feet, some were able to fly, and eventually we have human beings. That's what we are against. It's called macroevolution. It's a theory that you go from molecules to man, all naturally without any divine intervention, without God being involved in the process. Now, how many examples do we have of that? What evidence do we have for that? None. Zero. Zilch. Nada. We don't have any evidence for it because we have never observed anything that would point in that direction. What's the biggest problem with macroevolution, biologically speaking, is that it would require additional information in our DNA. To go from a simple one-celled animal to an amoeba or to a little more complex multicellular animal would require additional information added to the DNA that's not already there. And it's not a little bit of information. You would require, several sets of encyclopedia worth of information added just to account for some of the changes. And there is no known mechanism in the natural world that adds information to DNA to account for changes. Microevolution, it's already using the information that's there. But macro would require an influx of new instructions, assembly instructions, design instructions, very specific information that's not there. And there's a second mistake I want you to be aware of. This one, we don't make this mistake, they do. And don't let them get away with it. A lot of people say, well, there's a lot of evidence for Darwinian evolution. And that's when I'm talking about Darwinian evolution, I'm talking about molecules to man. That's what I'm going to talk about the rest of my talk. Not micro, we are okay with that. It's macro that we have a problem with. And so when people that believe this idea that we all come from that first cell by natural processes, when you ask them for evidence, when you ask them for, give me some evidence for that, what they appeal to is evidence of microevolution. Well, but bacteria develop resistance to antibiotics. Yes, but that doesn't prove your point. That only shows that changes occur within a family. What evidence do you have that we go from a whale, from a land-dwelling animal to a whale? What evidence do you have that we have that simians and humans have a common ancestor? What evidence do you have of a fish eventually being able to turn into a bird? Or was it a dinosaur that turned into a bird? You have different stories. Which one can you give me evidence for? You don't have any. There is no evidence. They appeal to evidence of microevolution to try to prove macroevolution. Don't let them get away with it. Don't get it. We agree that macroevolution happens. Now, there are 4 game-changing truths that the Titanic has run into. We'll call these icebergs. Excuse me. We'll call these icebergs. These are the 4 icebergs that have sunk the Titanic. We're going to go through the 4 of them, and at the end, I'm going to give you 4 more, that you can research on your own, and we can literally do 4 more after that, but we're not going to. I just want to give you the 4 big truths. that have been devastating to the idea of Darwinian evolution. First of all, the universe had a beginning and a personal cause. That has been devastating. The second truth that we know for a fact is that there's evidence of intelligent design. That has been devastating as well. The third truth is evidence of global architecture. That has been devastating. And finally, we have evidence of biological engineering. All of these truths, any one of them is enough to sink the ship. All four together is an absolutely devastating situation for macroevolution. So let's take one at a time. Let's start with the first iceberg. See, the Darwinian vessel has always traveled under the notion that matter is eternal. And if it's not eternal and it had a beginning, then it must have come from nothing. That's all it's ever posited. But the truth of the fact is that is now undeniable is that the universe is not eternal. It had a beginning. That's a scientific fact. And not only did it have a beginning, but the cause was a personal cause. And so it's not a random process. It didn't come from nothing, and it hasn't existed eternally. So the entire foundation, the foundational explanation for the origin of matter and energy and time and space, all of it collapses completely in the Darwinian model, whereas in the biblical model, it flourishes because that reflects reality. Let me show that to you. Let's do a quick exercise in thinking, which, by the way, I appreciate the young people that are here today because we have lost the ability to think. Our culture is not teaching our young people how to think. They're telling them what to think. You got to think this, and this. But they don't tell them why. They don't teach them how to think. By the way, the church is committing the same mistake. The church is telling young people, here's what you need to believe. God exists. The Bible is his word. God is a Trinity. God created the world. Just the Holy Spirit. Jesus is Lord. But why? It's what it was Josh McDowell was telling us today. How do we know it's true? We need to take that step and show people how to think. That's what motivated me. After teaching this to high school seniors for 15 years, I wrote a book called How to Think. How to think, because we need to be able to know how to think. And if we don't know how to think clearly, we're going to believe anything anybody tells us. We need to be able to think critically. We need to be able to critically evaluate ideas. So let's do a little thought experiment here where we're actually going to think about this issue. So we'll start under the premise that the universe exists, okay? I don't think that's debatable. If anybody doesn't believe the universe exists, it's really hard to talk to people like that because we're in it. We're living it. So let's start that as a foundation. Now, if the universe exists, there's only two possible explanations. It had no beginning and has always existed, or it began to exist. Now, follow me here. That exhausts all possibilities. It either began to exist at some point, or it has always existed. There's no gray matter here. There's nothing to choose in between. These are the two possible options. Now, if it had no beginning, we would call it a steady state theory. Science embraced that for centuries, and it's basically the idea that everything has always existed. But we know now that that's not a fact. And when I say we, I'm talking about Christians and atheists and skeptics and scholars, and everybody agrees that there is a beginning. So that's not even debated today. Everybody grants it. You have Hubble, Einstein, modern cosmology, Hawkins. Everybody agrees that there was a beginning. So we'll start by establishing that that's the right answer. It had a beginning. The universe had a beginning. Now, if the universe had a beginning, then it was either caused or not caused. Again, we've exhausted all possibilities. What does a universe that has a beginning but wasn't caused look like? Man, that's a really tough one. You're talking about something spontaneously generating out of nothing. Nobody caused it. It just spontaneously, poof, there it is. We have a universe. From nothing, okay? That's what a not caused universe is. Everything from nothing. It used to be the most ridiculous notion ever until more recent times. In more recent times, you have people like Lawrence Krauss at Arizona State, or no longer at Arizona State, but up until very recently. You have Peter Atkins, a chemist from Oxford. You have Stephen Weinberg, retired physicist from University of Texas in Austin. You have Stephen Hawking, You have these guys all of a sudden have now come together to say that the universe began from nothing. That's their answer. It began from nothing. So spontaneous generation has made a comeback. Okay, it used to be a belief. It was completely discredited by science. If you've ever heard of the experiments where, meat was left out and then it developed, all of a sudden in a couple of days there were maggots on it, and people would say, wow, look, spontaneously generated. And then one scientist came around and said, wait a minute, that's not it. I've been observing this, and flies come and they deposit their larvae, and that's what you're looking. It didn't spontaneously generate. There were even experiments. I have old science books that give you experiments that you can prove spontaneous generation. They're hilarious because at that time people believed it, so you had to be able to repeat this in your laboratory. So here's one of the experiments. Go to a dark place in your house, put a big jar or a vase, put some rocks, damp cloth, and cheese, and leave it there for about 6 weeks. And when you come back, you're going to find spontaneously generated mice. Not exactly. You see, because Mama Mouse and Papa Mouse were in love, and they found a Holiday Inn in a beautiful dark place with a bed, cheese, privacy, and hence we have little mice. It wasn't spontaneously generated. But now all of a sudden it's made a comeback. It's pretty sad, actually. And I have another entire talk called The Universe from Nothing where we go into the science of it, and I show you that it's completely fallacious. It is completely wrong without any foundation, and they'll tell you themselves that they have no evidence for it. It's just an idea. So we believe it's caused. Why? Because of something called the law of causality. And I don't know any scientist that's willing to walk away from the law of causality. Because the law of causality is, a matter of fact, the foundation of most of modern science. You can't do science unless you understand that every effect has a cause. And that's what the law of causality says. So if the universe began to exist, it's an effect. And if it began to exist and it's an effect, it has to have a cause. And that's just a fact. So we'll say that caused is 100% more likely than uncaused. Now, once we've posited that, we have to ask the last question, okay? Whoever caused it or whatever caused it could have been a personal agent or a non-personal force of some kind. So those are the two options. Again, that's exhaustive. There's no other alternative. So what would a universe look like if it was caused by some kind of energy or some kind of force that we have no idea what it was because there was nothing? But let's assume that maybe there was something, some kind of energy. Okay, what would it look like? You would have a universe without any order because order comes from intelligence. You would have a universe with no intelligence because intelligence only comes from intelligence. You would have a universe with no ethics because the wind doesn't care if you kill him or not. Energy doesn't care if you kill him or not. No ethics whatsoever. And that's not what we see. What do we see in our universe today? We have a world that has order. It has design and intelligence and morality. It seems to have been designed for a purpose. Everything about our world points to a personal creator. And I have another talk on that one called Which God, in which I go through a whole series of explanations or observations of the universe that point to a personal God. And there's plenty. To begin with, if there was nothing and now there's something, it's because somebody made a choice. Somebody made a decision, and only personal beings can make a decision to create something where something was not there. So it is definitely a personal cause. So just a simple thought experiment without even cracking open our Bibles, just using the mind that God has given us, shows us that you have a universe that had a beginning, that was caused, and the cause was personal. And that, to the Titanic, to the Darwinian ship, is absolutely devastating. That truth is much more than it can handle. It does away completely with the unguided natural processes. You see, that was Darwin's claim to fame. That's why Richard Dawkins, my favorite atheist, says that Dawkins made it possible to be intellectually satisfied atheist. Because now we don't need God for an explanation because we can explain everything naturally. No. Not quite. Now, the second iceberg, as we run through this, the Darwinian vessel has always posited that there's no designer. It's just change over time affecting matter, and you get everything you see. As a matter of fact, the phrase is, given enough time, you can go from any level of simplicity to any level of complexity. All you need is time. A little bit of luck in one generation, and add it to a little bit of luck in another generation, and you get the changes, and you can account for everything we see in our universe today. And biology tells us that, but that's not the truth. The evidence of intelligent design is undeniable. You see, here's what biology says. Richard Dawkins says in The Blind Watchmaker that biology is a study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. Everything appears to be designed, but it's not. And biologists, and I can give you quote after quote of biologists and biology books telling you, look, it looks designed, but you got to remember it's not. Remember it's not. Remember it's not. It only looks designed, but it's not. You can't forget that it's not designed. I'm simple, okay? I'm simple-minded, and I think, if it looks like a dog, barks like a dog, wags its tail like a dog, it's probably a dog. I mean, that's what it points to. That's what the evidence is showing us. Now, this is the kind of stuff that's being taught in public schools. Let me show you a clip from a PBS special that later became a curriculum that was later taught in many public schools. This is their accounting of origins and, obviously, their explanation of whatever appears to be designed in our universe. Watch this clip. Make sure we have audio. Watch this clip with me. It's very short.
Over the course of 14 billion years, hydrogen gas transformed itself into mountains, butterflies, the music of Bach, and you and me.
You can buy the curriculum. There's a textbook, a curriculum for high schools, and it's been taught a lot. Did you catch that? Over the course. If you have a deep voice and you have classical music, it's got to be true. Just always look for those signs. Over the course of 14 billion years, hydrogen gas transformed itself into mountains and butterflies, the music of Bach and you and I. No. No. See, Richard Dawkins says in The Blind Watchmaker, we have seen that living things are too improbable and too beautifully designed to have come into existence by chance. And we'll say, wow, what happened? Did he convert? No, he did not. You continue to listen to him, and what does he say? It couldn't have happened in one stroke of chance, but a little bit of luck in one generation, one mutation that gave us a benefit. And a little bit of luck in another generation, and that mutation gave us a benefit. And a little bit of luck in the next generation. And eventually you can go from any level of simplicity to any level of complexity. All you need is time. That doesn't work either. The time scales don't work. Designed by a blind watchmaker, really? That's what he posits. Evolution is a watchmaker that is both blind and brainless. That's Richard Dawkins. That's his quote. I don't think so. I don't think so. We've already established that the cause is personal. By being a personal cause, it means it's not brainless. And a blind watchmaker would have a pretty hard time making watches, designing watches. Now, what's the biggest evidence we have against this whole idea? It's called information. That's it. That's the biggest argument we've got. DNA. DNA has 3 billion characters. 3 billion characters. That's 3 billion letters, chemical letters. And they're just not random letters. They're instructions. They're written into words, phrases, paragraphs, chapters of a book. And they're the instructions for life. Everything you need to assemble life is in those instructions. Who wrote the instruction book? Where did the instructions come from? You see, that's the information. That's the question we need to ask. Where did the information come? Where did the specific alphabet come from? Who arranged it? Who put all that information with incredible building details into DNA? By the way, do you know of any instruction book? Listen carefully to the question. Do you know of any instruction book that actually builds anything? No, the books don't build anything. The books tell you how to build it. But unless you have workers and materials and intelligence, you're not going to have it built. Well, it just so happens that these instructions for life are placed inside a factory called a cell. And that factory has the employees, the materials, the manufacturing, quality control, fuel supplies, waste disposal, you name it, everything you see in a city. As a matter of fact, I'm going to let an atheist tell you how complicated it is. Listen to this atheist, okay? This is based on a TED Talk by a guy who's a PhD from University of California, Berkeley, neuroscientist, also an engineer by trade, and he's marveled at what he sees when he looks under a microscope at a simple bacteria. Listen to what he says. If I had time, I'd show you the actual TED Talk clip, but I'll just give you the quote. Here's what he says. When I look through a microscope at a humble bacterium, I still wonder how it really works. Because the mechanical watch that is life is not like any watch we've ever built. It's biological gears and springs, but they fill up rooms and buildings and cities of a vast microscopic landscape that's bustling with activity. On the one hand, it's extremely well organized, but on the other hand, the sheer scale of all of this unfamiliar, well-organized stuff that happens in there, listen carefully, makes me feel that I've stumbled onto an alternate landscape of technology that's built by an engineer 1,000,000 times smarter than me. Can I get an amen for that? Here's an atheist, and he's telling you, when I look under a microscope, what I see tells me that must have been done by an engineer 1,000,000 times smarter than me. And you ask yourself, okay, so where do you go from there? You're an atheist. Where do you go from there? Well, you continue to listen, and you know where he goes. You know where he goes from there? It must have been aliens that did it. I'm honest. I'm telling you. He believes that some intelligent beings from somewhere in the universe designed life and placed it on Earth. He's not the only one. I could show you a clip of Richard Dawkins saying the same thing in the documentary Expelled, where he says that maybe a very intelligent race from somewhere in the universe that also evolved by Darwinian means, he says, even they evolved, okay, have planted life on our planet. There's a name for that. It's called panspermia. There's a theory. And some people actually believe this, like this incredibly brilliant engineer believes this. Now, come on. Think about it for a minute. So what you're saying is that you don't see any evidence for God. You'd rather believe in aliens than believe that there is a God who created the universe? And that's exactly what it is. They'd rather believe in aliens than believe in God. Because they say there's no evidence of God. Now, is there evidence for God? Let me show you a quick debunked video. This is the kind of material we're developing to help people. So just watch this video with me, and then you tell me. Volume, please.
Lots of people say there's no evidence for God. Well, we're going to knock that one out in 3. I'm just going to have to keep it simple, throw in the old 1-2 combo, get in and out real quick, and let you fine folks chat all about it, okay? Punch 1 I'm going to call the info uppercut. When's the last time you walked into a library and asked, hey, where are all the books that have been written by mindless products of natural laws? The librarian would probably laugh at you and tell you that no such books exist. And they don't exist because they can't exist. Why not? Because first of all, it's just common sense. The words that form the message in books always originate from a person with a brain. Or to say it a bit more scientifically, the message of the book, the purpose, comes to be understood by the orderly placement of the words, design, and information. Information. Now, anytime we find info, these basic laws always apply. Number 1, matter doesn't spontaneously produce information. Number 2, only a mental source, intelligence, can generate new creative information. In other words, just like those books that couldn't originate without a mind, neither could life. Why not, you ask? Because we know that DNA contains information. Therefore, the laws of information science apply, which means the information in DNA couldn't have spontaneously generated, and that a mind is behind the information. Period. No exceptions. Look at it this way. The simplest life form we know of is an amoeba, and it contains as much information in its DNA as 1,000 complete sets of Encyclopedia Britannica. So, are we to believe that there's no way a message in a library book could spontaneously generate, but far more complicated messages in DNA that contain 1,000 times more information could have? Not likely. You see, when it comes to life or anything else that contains information, the laws of information science confirm the necessity of a creative mind. And guess what? In the very first book of the Bible, it just happens to mention that. In the beginning, God created. Bam. Uppercut lands on the chin. And now here comes the indefensible head blow. We'll call this the not a big bang bing swing, the KO to the claim that there's no evidence of God, the law of causality, left hook of doom. It goes like this. Everything that had a beginning had a cause. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause. Now, either something caused the universe to come into existence, or nothing caused it. I might not be the smartest guy behind the telescope, but honest, practical, everyday thinking's going to lead me to the former. You have to work pretty hard to conjure up a way that nothing did it. You see, it's pretty improbable, nigh impossible, to account for design, information, and cause if the universe just exploded from nothing. Smack. And while we're on the topic, where did the matter come from that exploded? Are we really to believe that there was nothing and then it exploded, and now the exploded nothing is something, and we just happen to be smart enough to discover and understand the very laws that prove the opposite? And if the general understanding of the law of cause and effect is true, how can matter come from a lesser cause like nothing? I mean, come on. I don't have a bunch of letters after my name, but even a monkey knows better. And yeah, I snuck in a couple of extra jabs in there, so sue me. Now for some parting words from our sponsor, the Bible. It tells us in Romans 1:20 that since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so they are without excuse. It also says that people actually know the truth, but they reject it, which explains why even though there's overwhelming evidence that there is a God, evidence won't convince the unwilling. Sad but true. So there you have it. With just a couple of meaningful blows, the claim that there is no evidence for God is down for the count, mi amigos. In other words, it's been debunked. Adios.
Now, mature folks, I understand that that was really fast, but it's not geared for you. It's made for the younger generation that has a very quick attention span, a very short attention span. But is it made well enough you'd see it again and try to get the information? This is the kind of material we want to put in your hands of the young people on your phone. We have 2 sets already done. We did 6 originally, and we just got the funding recently. We did another 7. We have 13 of them. We're starting to do them in Spanish as well. We're trying to come up with one every month. You know, is the Bible reliable? The whole idea of a video on all the sex issues that have been arising. The Noah's Ark, how did you fit all the animals on the ark? All of these questions that people normally ask, you know, and just quick answers. And we give it away. These videos cost a lot of money to make. We spend about $12,000 per video to get it done professionally and done right. And we give them away. All I'm going to ask you to do, if you want them, is just text 5 to 51555, adios, which means goodbye, TNG, with a space between adios and TNG. You do that to 51555, and we'll send it to your phone. You'll have to give us your email because we want to send all of them as they come out. But you'll get the playlist, and you can show them to somebody. If you don't want to do the technology, we have them in the back in actual DVDs that you can show in your small group, in church, or whatever. We want to put this in your hand. We want you to have these tools so that when somebody comes up with, well, there's no evidence for God, boom, you have something for it. Now, we have 2 more icebergs, and I have 3 minutes to do them, so this is going to be quick. Now, the next iceberg is the multiverse, the idea that natural processes account for everything we see. But that's not what we see. In our universe, there's incredible evidence for global architecture. What do I mean by that? 29 fine-tuned parameters of the universe, constants and equations of gravity, electromagnetism, strong and weak nuclear forces, ratio of proton to electron mass, etc. You have an additional 51 fine-tuned parameters of our galaxy, solar system, planets, the distance of the sun, the type of sun, size, temperature, all of that, the size, actual tilt, rotation, speed of the moon, the composition of the earth. All of these, even the stability of Jupiter and Saturn, have to be exact and precise, or there is no life on Earth. What are the odds of 80 of these measurements lining up perfectly to coincide for life? Mathematicians will tell you it's 10 to the negative 53rd power. The probability of all 80 of these coming together, that's impossible. That's a 1 followed by 53 zeros. 1 in that chance of getting it. So the evidence of global architecture is devastating. And the last iceberg is unguided natural processes, to which we respond with evidence of biological engineering. Now, I'm going to show you a quick video from the Smithsonian Museum. This video from the Smithsonian Museum shows you what the world believes happened and where whales come from, whale evolution. Please pay attention. Audio, please.
Scientists now think that the earliest ancestor of whales was similar to this 50-million-year-old wolf-like mammal called Synonyx. Synonyx was a predatory scavenger that lived and hunted along the shores of an ancient sea. Perhaps its descendants found the water a source of abundant food and a haven from competition. Over millions of years, front legs became fins, rear legs disappeared, bodies lost fur and
Ta-da.
took on their familiar streamlined shape.
Really, you believe that? You believe that a land-dwelling wolf-like creature went back into the ocean and became a whale? And we're the ones that have a faith problem. We're the ones that have a problem. Really, that's incredible. When you look at all the changes that have to take place in a whale, you're talking about changes in everything. It's impossible, absolutely impossible for that to be the case. I'm going to skip that explanation and go on to, there's 4 more icebergs that I challenge you to study on your own. Dinosaur bones that contain soft tissue. DNA that now is functional. The junk DNA is no longer an issue. Genetic entropy. Irreducible complexity. And by the way, I will share my PowerPoint with you. I'm going to show you my email in a second. Take a picture of it. If not, you can see me in the back. I'll give you my email. I'll send you the PowerPoint so that you can come back and see what I didn't show you today. And you can study it all and become familiar with it. I'll finish with this interview. This tells everything you need to know. A molecular biologist working on identifying genetic controls for disease was interviewed by George Kaler of the Ledger in Lynchburg, Virginia. The article was entitled The Biologist. Listen to this interview. It really will open your eyes as to what's happening in the world of science. George asked the guy, do you believe that genetic information evolved? The DNA information we just talked about. Do you believe it evolved? Here's his answer. George, nobody I know in my profession believes it evolved. It was engineered by genius beyond genius, and such information could not have been written any other way. The paper and the ink did not write the book. Knowing what we know, it's ridiculous to think otherwise. That's a molecular biologist telling you that, a geneticist. He says, have you ever wrote that in any paper or stated in any public lecture? He responds, no, I just say that it evolved. To be a molecular biologist requires one to hold 2 insanities at the same time. One, it would be insane to believe in evolution when you can see the truth for yourself. And 2, it would be insane to say you don't believe in evolution. Because all government work, research grants, papers, big college lectures, everything would stop. I would be without a job or relegated to the other outer fringes where I couldn't earn a decent living. George responds, I hate to say it, but that sounds intellectually dishonest. And he responds, the work I do in genetic research is honorable. We will find the cures to many of mankind's worst diseases, but in the meantime, we have to live with an elephant in the room. What elephant? Well, he responds, creation design. It's like an elephant in the living room. It moves around, takes up an enormous amount of space, loudly trumpets, bumps onto us, knocks things over, eats a ton of hay, and smells like an elephant, and yet we have to swear it isn't there. So I've showed you today 4 icebergs that are telling you the Titanic ship is sinking. Darwin's ship is sinking. So take a picture. That's my email. I'll gladly send you this presentation. Thank you so much. You've listened great. God bless you.